The sound of ice cubes clinking against the bottom of the crystal glass was the only thing breaking the absolute silence of that gigantic mansion on the Upper East Side. I knew that, behind that rigid posture and the lost gaze out the panoramic window, there was a woman slowly crumbling, piece by piece, while the outside world thought she had it all. I never imagined that I, the most invisible person in that immense house, would be the sole witness to the tears she refused to let fall in front of others. It was on that cold night in June of 2002 that the abysmal distance between my simple world and her golden, sorrowful universe finally began to disappear. If you enjoy intense stories where love blooms in the most unlikely circumstances and breaks down all social barriers, subscribe right now to the RP channel. Turn on your notifications right away to follow every chapter of this journey of surrender, vulnerability, and redemption. Today's story will show you that sometimes the richest heart is the one that has nothing in its pockets, but everything to offer someone in need. My name is Penelope. I am 28 years old, and to New York high society, I am just a discreet shadow in a gray uniform and an impeccable white apron. I grew up in Queens, the daughter of hardworking and honest parents who taught me from an early age that dignity is priceless, even when our bank account is practically empty. I have worked for 2 years as a housekeeper in Ms. Audrey's mansion, a powerful woman everyone fears and admires in the social columns of the magazines. My job was to maintain order in the silent chaos of that house, serving coffee and dusting furniture that cost more than my entire life. Ms. Audrey was always known as the Ice Queen by the staff and even by her own friends, a woman who never smiled and seemed carved from cold marble. She was 42 years old, with an aristocratic and intimidating beauty, but her brown eyes carried a deep sadness that no money in the world could hide. Ever since Mr. Richard, her ex-husband, left the house 3 months ago, taking half the joy that remained there, the mansion had become a mausoleum of luxury and loneliness. I watched the routine repeat itself every day, like a sad movie playing in slow motion before my attentive eyes. Every day, exactly at 6 o'clock in the evening, when the other employees went home, she would sit in the leather armchair facing the sunroom. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't read the company reports. And she didn't answer the phone that rang insistently on the coffee table. Her only company was a bottle of imported whiskey, which dropped in level frighteningly fast with each passing night. I would stay in the kitchen, pretending to organize dishes that were already clean, just so I wouldn't leave her completely alone in that dark immensity. The scent of her expensive perfume, mixed with the strong aroma of alcohol, began to permeate the living room around 8 o'clock in the evening, creating a heavy and suffocating atmosphere. I watched her from afar, through the crack in the door, seeing how her shoulders trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. It was painful to see such a powerful woman reduced to a ghost of herself, trying to drown a pain that seemed to have no end. I felt a tightness in my chest, a strange urge to walk over there and tell her she didn't have to go through this alone. But I knew my place. I was paid to be invisible, to be efficient and mute, and crossing the line between employer and employee could cost the job that supported my family and my sister's college tuition. The rule was clear and unspoken. I took care of the house, not the lady of the house, and the problems of the rich shouldn't affect me. However, my faith in God prevented me from being indifferent to the suffering of others, no matter how many millions that person had in the bank. I said quiet little prayers while mopping the floor, asking the Father to bring some light to that tormented soul. The house was beautiful, decorated with fine art and Persian rugs, but it was as cold as a tomb, lifeless, without laughter, and lacking human warmth. Sometimes I thought that my small home in Queens, with its peeling paint and the noise of the street, was much richer than that palace of solitude. Ms. Audrey had everything money could buy, but she lacked the basics, the very thing that makes people want to get out of bed the next day. I saw the bitterness hardening the features of her face, turning her beauty into a rigid mask of defense against the world. On that specific Tuesday, the rain was falling hard outside, beating against the double-paned windows with a violence that matched the mood inside the living room. Mr. Richard had called earlier, and I heard him yelling through the phone, humiliating her over some contract or division of assets. After the call, she didn't say a word. She just walked over to the bar with firm steps and filled her glass to the brim, without adding ice this time. The silence that followed was the heaviest I had ever witnessed in those 2 years of work. I finished drying the last wine glass in the kitchen and looked at the clock on the wall, which read almost 10 o'clock at night. My shift had ended a long time ago, and I needed to hurry to catch the last subway train that would take me back to the reality of my neighborhood. I grabbed my worn-out purse and my umbrella, took a deep breath, and walked toward the living room to let her know I was leaving, just as I did every night. But something in the air made me stop halfway, a bad feeling that sent a chill down my spine. When I reached the archway entering the living room, the scene I saw made my heart stop for a second, and my purse slipped from my hand onto the rug. Miss Audrey wasn't in the armchair as usual. She had fallen to her knees on the rug, with her face buried in her hands, sobbing in such a visceral way that it seemed something inside her had physically broken. The glass was tipped over on the floor, the amber liquid staining the beige carpet, and she looked like a lost, frightened child, so very far from the Iron Woman who commanded an empire. I stood paralyzed there, torn between the fear of being an intruder and the compassion screaming inside my chest, telling me to do something. Reason told me to turn around, leave quietly, and pretend I hadn't seen anything, preserving her dignity and my employment. But seeing that woman so utterly destroyed, so human, and so alone, made all the rules of etiquette and social hierarchy lose their meaning in that instant. I took the first step into the living room, unaware that this simple movement would change both of our destinies forever. I froze in the middle of the dark room, and for a brief, terrible moment, I wanted to turn back and vanish, to disappear for good, just as I always did, being nothing but the efficient shadow. Audrey's silence had turned into a muffled moan, and it was impossible to ignore the raw despair coming from that woman thrown onto the floor. Penelope's heart, my simple heart, screamed for me to do something, while my mind, the housekeeper's mind, yelled about the danger of crossing that forbidden, invisible line. I knelt slowly, close enough to be heard, but maintaining a respectful distance so as not to invade her space of pain. I called out to her softly, my voice cracking with hesitation, and felt my face burn with embarrassment for her, as if the humiliation were mine as well, there in the darkness. "Ms. Audrey, are you all right?" I asked, knowing the question was stupid, but it was the only one that came to my mouth in that moment of panic. She lifted her head sharply, her eyes red and her face pale, and glared at me with a mixture of fury and shock that made me want to apologize for existing right there. She wasn't used to having witnesses to her extreme vulnerability, especially not her maid. "Penelope, what are you doing here? You should have left by now," she hissed in a hoarse voice, hurriedly trying to wipe her tears with the palm of her cold hand. Her command had the crack of a whip, and the reaction was exactly what one would expect from the Ice Queen, trying to rebuild her mask in a rush. I should have obeyed immediately and run out the door, but the image of her there, undone and soiled by spilled whiskey, gave me a courage I never knew I possessed. I needed to go beyond my role of cleaning up her messes. I answered with a steady but low voice, maintaining the professional tone that protected me, but infusing it with genuine human concern. "I was on my way out, ma'am, but I heard a noise in the fall, and I couldn't leave you like this," I said, looking directly at the damp floor and not at her embarrassed face. I picked up my fallen purse and umbrella and pointed to the dark stain slowly spreading across the incredibly expensive Persian rug. "Let me help you up first, and then I'll clean up this mess. You need some tea or something to warm you up. You're shivering." She sat in silence for a long minute that felt like an eternity, analyzing me from head to toe, as if trying to decipher an incomprehensible riddle. I saw the exact moment the anger of being caught red-handed gave way to a deep confusion in her eyes. She was used to paying for every service, but I was offering something priceless, my human attention, and my sincere care. She accepted my hand, reaching out to her without the formality of an employer, but with the desperate need of a drowning person. The touch of our hands was brief, but it was the first physical contact we had ever shared that didn't involve me serving or handing her something. Her skin was as cold as ice, and mine, warm from labor, contrasted in that fleeting touch, sending a shiver down my entire arm. She leaned on me with a weakness I never imagined she possessed, and I helped her sit back down in the leather armchair, a little closer to the unlit fireplace. I hurried to the kitchen, moving with urgency to give her space, and put water on the stove to boil, deciding on a simple chamomile tea. I prayed in my internal monologue to the Father to guide me in that moment and to keep me from doing anything wrong that might offend her. I was risking my job, but I felt God was calling me to care for that soul, lost in her own castle of wealth and pain. When I returned with the steaming cup on the tray, she was sitting in a more composed manner, though still with a vacant stare and uneven breathing. She accepted the cup without saying, "Thank you," but her eyes told me enough. She drank the tea slowly, feeling the warmth return to her cold hands. The tension was so thick I could cut it with the butter knife on the tray. I grabbed the cloth and basin and started scrubbing the whiskey stain out of the rug, automatically returning to my original duty. I wanted to show her that my care didn't come with ulterior motives, that I still knew my place. As I scrubbed the carpet, sitting there on the floor, I heard her voice, lower and normal now, breaking the silence. "You saw me in that state, Penelope. You think I'm pathetic, don't you?" I stopped scrubbing the rug, rag in hand, and turned my head to look at her sincerely, letting honesty speak for me. I was sitting on the floor, and she was sitting in her expensive armchair, but in that moment, the social contrast vanished, and we were just two women. "I think you are suffering too much, Miss Audrey," I said softly, with all my soul. "And to suffer like that, all alone, isn't pathetic. It's inhuman." My answer caught her completely off guard. She expected judgment, respectful silence, or hollow denial. My simplicity and genuine truth seemed to have disarmed her pride and all her defenses. I saw the tears well up in her eyes again, but she held them back with a visible, painful effort, swallowing hard. She didn't answer with words, just a slow nod, processing the weight of my observation. The first real connection was made. The barrier had been broken, not by an act of love, but by an act of desperate humanity. I looked down at the stain that was almost fading from the rug, but the mark that night would leave on us both would be permanent, and I felt a strange, wonderful kind of fear. I knew that, after that night, we would no longer be just employer and employee, but two people sharing a profound secret. The next morning, the mansion woke up to the atmosphere of a moral hangover, silent and heavy, and I braced myself for the inevitable backlash. Ms. Audrey had her armor intact once again, her features harder than before, and her eyes barely met mine when I served her strong coffee in the porcelain cup. She tried in every way to undo what had happened the night before, treating me with an exaggerated professional coldness that bordered on polite disdain. She gave me clipped instructions about cleaning the library, a clear sign that she wanted to re-establish the distance and protocol I had dared to break. I accepted the assignment in silence and headed for the massive room that felt like a temple of wisdom and knowledge I could never possess. The library was a maze of dark shelves smelling of old paper, and I began methodically dusting the spines, trying to erase the strange feeling the previous night had awakened in me. I prayed to God for the discernment to step back into my place and not confuse her momentary humanity with an invitation to an intimacy that didn't exist. As I cleaned a shelf of fiction books, my eyes locked on a cover that was familiar to me, with a title I would recognize anywhere. It was the same romance novel by a famous American author about imperfect love and redemption that I was reading at home, in completely different editions, of course. Hers was a collector's edition, hardcover and gleaming, and mine was a used bookstore copy, with yellowed pages and a spine worn from use. The irony of that discovery hit me hard, and I smiled slightly, all alone among so many books. At that moment, I realized that behind the facade of the ironclad businesswoman, there was a soul seeking comfort in the exact same stories of flawed love and redeemed loneliness that mine sought out. That little coincidence was a map, a clue that her heart and mine vibrated on the same frequency, separated only by yards of marble and fortunes of difference. I kept that discovery as a precious secret in my chest, knowing it was a connection she would never admit out loud, not even to herself. Later, while I was organizing the papers on her desk in the home office, she walked into the room to grab a document, and the tension hung in the air again like a heavy cloud. She hesitated before leaving, and I felt she was about to bring up the night before to reprimand me, or, perhaps, to thank me and pay me to forget it ever happened. I looked at her with the serenity my faith gave me, and waited for her to break the ice again, this time on her own terms. That was when she noticed the book I had pulled out of place to dust, and her gaze softened imperceptibly, as if I had touched an old wound. She sighed deeply, leaning against the doorframe with a posture that showed exhaustion, not power. She didn't talk about the book, but the conversation that followed was the result of that small glimpse of humanity she allowed me to see. Richard is trying to take control of the foundation away from me, Penelope. He doesn't care about the money. He only cares about the status, about the power to say he won, and that I am too weak to maintain the legacy I inherited. It's humiliating, she confessed in an almost inaudible voice, without using my name, as if she were talking to herself. I noted the bitterness in how she said the word legacy. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her, my eyes locked on her confession. My internal irony was screaming. The boss was confessing to me the pain of losing her social status, while I, the housekeeper, was the total embodiment of a lack of status in that luxurious environment. I was the only person there who saw her without the weight of a title, and I knew her true pain wasn't losing the foundation, but losing her reason for being. Ma'am, your worth isn't found in the society columns or in the foundation, and Mr. Richard can't take away who you truly are, I said, feeling the boldness of my own words. She looked at me, shocked, because no one had ever confronted her with such a simple, disarming truth. She laughed, but it was a hollow, sad laugh. And what am I, Penelope? An embarrassed alcoholic ex-wife who lost her way and drowned in her own privileges? I lost my identity. I lost my purpose when I lost my home, she whispered. And I understood that home meant more than the marriage. It was her entire life. It was the first time she revealed the profound loneliness haunting her, and I felt a wave of pity and a strange affection for this fiercely defenseless woman. She was bearing her soul naked, and I, the maid, was the only one holding the towel. The social divide no longer existed. There was only the abyss of emptiness she felt, which I, somehow, was able to recognize. I knew that for her to truly heal, she needed to step away from that whiskey and that cold mansion that only reminded her of failure. I needed to do something, a simple move, but one with massive impact, to pull her out of that vicious cycle. I was vigilant, watching Audrey's every move, and I realized her professional coldness was just a desperate way to protect herself from my human gaze. In the days following our conversation in the office, she tried to be stricter, but I could spot the subtle line of nervousness in her jaw, a clear sign that the confession had affected her deeply. I tried to keep my focus on my work, but it was impossible to ignore her mounting irritation and the silent urgency with which she returned to her glass of whiskey every night at the exact same time. On that Wednesday, I lingered while cleaning the dining room liquor cabinet, an imposing antique piece of furniture that seemed to hold all the mansion's secrets. I pretended to be polishing the wood, but in reality, I was searching, following an instinct that told me her addiction ran deeper and was more calculated than it appeared. There were no bottles missing from the obvious spot where she grabbed her evening whiskey, and the wine cellar was locked with a padlock I didn't have the key for. But something about her ritual felt wrong. I slid my hand behind a row of incredibly expensive wine bottles on the bottom shelf of the cabinet, where only dust and neglect reigned. My finger brushed against the coldness of a glass bottle that shouldn't be there, and my heart raced in my chest with the terrible realization of what I was looking for. I pulled it out carefully, and there it was, hidden in the back. A new bottle of vodka, already half empty and skillfully camouflaged behind other drinks she never touched. The discovery hit me with the force of a punch to the stomach, knocking the wind out of my lungs and forcing me to lean against the shelf. It wasn't just the evening whiskey. She was drinking during the day, in hidden doses, lying even to herself about the severity of her problem. It was a shameful secret, a silent confession that she had entirely lost control of her own life, and that alcohol was the only safe haven she could find. I stood there for a long moment, the heavy bottle in my hand, pondering what to do with that irrefutable proof of her human frailty. I could have thrown it in the trash, or returned it to its hiding place, but something in my soul compelled me to place it on the kitchen counter, in plain sight, right next to the bottle of mineral water she drank from. I needed her to know that she wasn't alone in her suffering, but also that she could no longer hide from me. Later, when it was time to leave, I went into the office to drop off the keys, and as usual, she was sitting in her armchair with a glass in her hand, pretending to read a useless document. She was focused, or pretending to be, but her eyes quickly darted to the kitchen counter, which was visible through the sliding glass door. The exposed bottle of vodka sat there, gleaming under the bright overhead light, like a ghost she could no longer ignore. I felt her body tense up in the armchair, and she gripped the glass in her hand so hard I feared the crystal would shatter into pieces. It was a silent confrontation, devoid of words, where only our eyes and the bottle of vodka spoke all the truth that had been hidden. I didn't judge her, I didn't scold her, and I didn't threaten her. I just looked at her with the purest, simplest concern, letting my entire soul shine through in that instant. My internal monologue was a desperate prayer to God, asking him to touch this woman's hardened heart and make her see the life she was throwing away, day after day. I didn't want her to see me as a judge, but as a mirror to her own fragility, a reflection of what she was becoming, right there in that castle of ice. The boss and the maid, united by an awkward silence and a bottle of vodka. She broke eye contact first, dropping her gaze back to the glass in her hand, but her silence was different now. It was the silence of someone caught red-handed, but who felt no anger, only a profound shame and resignation. I realized she was processing my total lack of judgment. She expected disapproval, a moralistic lecture, or cynicism, but she found only my simple compassion. She sighed deeply, a sigh drawn from the very bottom of her exhausted soul, and said to me in a low, almost inaudible voice, "You can go, Penelope. Have a good night, and please lock the door on your way out. Tomorrow is going to be a difficult day, and I will need you here early." It wasn't an apology, but it was the most sincere acknowledgement she had ever given me. At that moment, I knew my risky gesture hadn't pushed her away, but brought her closer. She felt cared for the first time, not by money, but by the loyalty and attention of someone who had nothing to gain from her pain. The absence of judgment was the balm she needed to begin healing. My heart felt a strange, dangerous joy that it was me who broke down that wall between us. I locked the door and walked to the bus stop in the cold darkness of New York, thinking of Ms. Audrey's face. I knew she had seen the bottle of vodka, and she had seen my concern. Her secret was no longer just hers, and the first step toward change had been planted. Now, I just needed a plan to get her out of that luxury mausoleum and force her to face real life. The next day, the vodka bottle had vanished from the counter, and Ms. Audrey was more reserved than ever. But there was something different in her eyes, a spark of curiosity that didn't exist before. She didn't mention my bold move, but when I served her coffee, she broke the silence abruptly, staring out the window, as if real life were happening on the street and not inside her living room. She was tired of that ice castle, and I could feel it in the heavy morning air. "Penelope, I can't stand this house anymore, this routine, this loneliness of white, silent walls. I need to breathe something that isn't this smell of expensive incense and regret," she said, her voice filled with an urgency that startled me. I stopped organizing the papers on her desk and looked at her, waiting for her to keep talking, feeling that the moment I had been hoping for had finally arrived. "I want you to take me out of here. Take me somewhere normal. A place where people don't care about dividing assets or about my foundation," she requested. And the request wasn't an order from the boss, but a sudden yearning from an imprisoned soul. Her eyes begged me for a real escape, not just another glass of whiskey consumed in the dark. My heart leaped with both joy and panic. I knew I couldn't take her directly into my world without causing culture shock, so I proposed a compromise, a bridge between our extreme realities. "I can take you to 2 places, ma'am. One to show you my world, and another to show you your world through my eyes. Where would you prefer to start this little escape of ours?" I asked, feeling the boldness of my proposal. She accepted, and I felt butterflies in my stomach, knowing I was stepping into entirely uncharted territory. That very afternoon, reluctantly and at her insistence, I accompanied her to a high-end Italian restaurant in one of the chicest spots on the Upper East Side, a demand on her part to maintain the appearance of a business lunch. I was wearing my best dress, but I felt grotesque and inadequate, lost amid too much silverware and sparkling crystal. The smell of truffle oil and the hushed whispers of conversations left me paralyzed. I felt like the embodiment of awkwardness, stuttering when speaking to the waiter, and noticing the curious stares of other patrons analyzing me from head to toe sitting next to Ms. Audrey. I could only think about the price of that tiny plate of pasta, which could have supported my sister and me for 2 whole weeks. She noticed my discomfort and touched my hand lightly, but her gesture didn't lessen my feeling of invading a place I didn't belong, a world built on rules I would never understand. I missed my simplicity, my plastic diner booths, and the smell of fried food in the air. I prayed silently that God would take me out of that uncomfortable situation and give me back my dignity in an environment where I didn't have to pretend to be something I wasn't. The food had no taste, the wine wouldn't go down, and I longed for the time to flee that oppressive excess that made me miss everything I had. The following night, it was my turn to keep the promise, and I took her to my world, to Mr. Pete's traditional no-frills diner in Queens, just a few miles away, but a universe apart from the Upper East Side. The place was loud, packed with people laughing and talking loudly, and the strong smell of hot oil and fried food flooded the room. She was dressed in discreet clothing, but she still turned heads, looking out of place in her subtle elegance. Audrey was tense at first, watching the commotion with an almost childlike strangeness, but soon her shoulders relaxed as she felt the vibrant, real energy of the place. I ordered us the best classic cheeseburger and a vanilla milkshake, my childhood favorites, and she accepted them with genuine curiosity, abandoning her ice queen persona. She looked at the families laughing, the couples arguing over a table, and the tired workers eating hurriedly before catching the last subway home. "This is life, Penelope. This is real. There's no gossip, no judgment, just people living," she said with an emotional voice, taking a bite of the juicy burger. She was smiling, a smile I had never once seen in her mansion, a smile that lit up her face and my heart with unexpected joy. It was there, amidst the noise and simplicity, that she felt like herself for the first time in a very long time. At the end of our culinary adventure, we walked slowly to the taxi stand, and she stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, turned to me, and gave me a quick hug, a clumsy, fleeting hug that caught me completely by surprise. "Thank you, Penelope. No one has ever taken me to a place where I felt so alive, so real," she confessed, her eyes shining with an emotion that wasn't sadness, but pure gratitude. Her touch, right in the middle of that simple neighborhood, made me feel a dangerous electricity. The quick hug Ms. Audrey gave me on the sidewalk in Queens right in front of Mr. Pete's diner, echoed inside me for days, leaving me restless and filled with a dangerous expectation. I tried to convince myself it was just a rich woman's gratitude for a moment of simplicity, but the warmth of her body and the scent of her perfume haunted me, mixing with the smell of fried food that lingered on my clothes. I prayed more than usual, asking God to give me the strength not to mix up my feelings and to keep my decency unshaken. However, she was different after that day of escape. She was more human, less the Ice Queen, and the coldness that once existed between us was now replaced by a kind of silent intimacy, loaded with glances that lingered just a little too long. She asked me questions about my life, about my sister, and about my neighborhood, showing a genuine interest that disarmed me. I felt we were walking on very thin ice, and that one false step would send our professional relationship crumbling into the abyss of the forbidden. On that Friday, the weather was gloomy, and the mansion felt even more oppressive, with the constant sound of heavy rain hitting the glass roof. Ms. Audrey had endured a particularly difficult day with Richard's lawyers, and she was visibly shaken, her hands trembling slightly and her face pale. She hadn't been drinking yet, but the tension was hovering over her like lightning about to strike, and I braced myself for the inevitable emotional collapse. Around 9 o'clock at night, she called me into the office with a weak voice, asking me to prepare some herbal tea, no sugar, and bring it to the living room. When I entered the room, she wasn't in her armchair, but lying on the massive velvet sofa, curled up, covering herself with a thick blanket that seemed far too small for the size of her suffering. I left the tray on the coffee table and approached slowly. She asked me to sit next to her, on the floor, so she could speak without being seen, and I obeyed, feeling my heart flutter with anxiety and apprehension. She started talking about the humiliation of the divorce, about how Richard made her feel small and incapable, stealing her self-confidence along with her assets. I was there, the housekeeper, acting as a therapist for her pain, feeling the pressure of my role increase with every word she spoke. As she talked, I noticed she wasn't drinking, and that gave me a strange joy and hope, as if my presence were serving as an anchor for her sobriety. I did what my heart told me and took one of her cold hands resting on the blanket, and held it firmly, just to pass on my warmth and solidarity. It was a pure gesture of comfort, but her response was immediate and electric. She stopped talking abruptly, her breath catching in the damp air, and turned her face toward me. I was kneeling there next to the sofa, holding my boss's hand, and the silence between us was filled by an attraction that was almost physical, almost irresistible, stronger than the pain itself. That was no longer a touch of comfort, but a touch of complicity and repressed desire. Suddenly, she shifted on the sofa, let go of my hand, but pulled me into a tight, desperate embrace, burying her face in my shoulder with the sheer force of someone clinging to a lifeboat in a stormy sea. The scent of her expensive perfume invaded my senses, and I felt her warm, vulnerable body pressed against mine. I was paralyzed, feeling her weakness and her strength at the same time, and my soul screamed with fear and longing. I didn't push her away. I didn't pull back. I just held her with the firmness my simple life had taught me, feeling the weight of her body and the danger of that forbidden embrace. My internal monologue was a whirlwind of guilt and bliss, and I knew that this lingering touch, which lasted for more than a full minute, was confirmation that the line between employer and employee had been erased forever. She pulled away slowly, her eyes watering, but with a flush of embarrassment and longing on her face that made my chest feel a warmth I had never known before. She didn't say anything. She just stared at me with an intensity that took my breath away, and my mouth went dry, unable to form a single word. At that moment, I knew we were no longer friends. We were two souls who desperately needed each other. The way Ms. Audrey defended me against Richard's cruelty was a point of no return, an undeclared act of love that made me feel more valued than any pay raise ever could. However, the clash left her drained and the emotional tension began to exact a heavy toll on her fragile health. I watched her for several days. She was eating very poorly, sleeping less, and seemed on the verge of a breakdown that alcohol, surprisingly, could no longer numb, because she was striving to stay sober for me. On that Thursday, while I was preparing a warm broth in the kitchen, I heard a dry thud and a faint groan coming from upstairs, from her massive bedroom. My heart raced, and I dropped the ladle into the pot, sprinting up the marble stairs with a speed totally incompatible with my job description, driven entirely by my growing concern. I entered the bedroom without knocking, invading her privacy out of a sheer need to know if she was okay, and in one piece. Ms. Audrey had collapsed on the floor of her walk-in closet, among piles of designer clothes and exorbitant shoes, her face pale as wax and her breathing shallow. She wasn't drunk, but terrified and shaking, firmly clutching a small bottle of pills I didn't recognize. The scene was one of absolute helplessness, and I quickly dropped to my knees beside her, taking her hand to check the faint pulse in her delicate wrist. She stared at me with wide eyes, not out of anger at the intrusion, but out of the sheer terror of being caught in her most intimate moment of weakness. She tried to hide the pill bottle with her body weight, but it was too late. I didn't ask anything. I just helped her up and got her into the soft bed, ignoring the luxury all around us, and focusing only on the person in front of me, frightened and trembling with fear. "Penelope, don't say anything. Please, don't say anything. It's the only shred of dignity I have left," she murmured, her voice choked with panic and shame. I sat next to her on the edge of the bed and held both her hands, transmitting the warmth and security I carried in my simple, strong spirit. I didn't pressure her. I just waited for her to trust me and speak her truth, the final mask that still shielded her from the world. She yielded to my silence and comforting presence, and her confession spilled out amid slow, painful sobs that seemed to tear at her throat. She revealed to me that she had a chronic illness, something that shamed and terrified her, and that Mr. Richard knew this secret and used it to humiliate and control her. Drinking was her escape from physical and emotional pain, not just from loneliness. I felt devastated and, at the same time, deeply honored that she had shared her most humiliating weakness with me, a secret not even her ex-husband dared to reveal publicly. I realized her true strength wasn't her power or her money, but her ability to fight the illness and Richard's control, and that she was fighting a war entirely on her own. In that moment of extreme vulnerability, I couldn't offer money or practical solutions, but I could offer her the one thing that kept me standing every day: my faith. I knelt again beside the bed, held her hands tightly, closed my own eyes, and offered a sincere prayer to Father God. I didn't use complex words, just the honest, simple language of my heart, asking the Father to heal her and protect her. Father God, look upon this daughter of yours, Audrey. She is strong, but she is tired, and the pain consumes her. Take the fear from her heart and shine your light on the illness that shames her. She is not alone, and you are with her. Give me the strength to be a safe harbor for her, so she may find purpose in the midst of this storm. Amen. I opened my eyes and looked at her, and tears were streaming silently down Ms. Audrey's face. They weren't tears of despair, but of profound relief, as if the sincere prayer of a simple maid had lifted a 1,000-ton weight from her shoulders. No one, ever, had prayed for her like that, with an open soul and a pure heart, and she was touched by the vulnerability of my faith. In that instant, the boss saw the strength in the maid's character, and I saw the fragile, dignified woman behind the millionaire. The last mask was shattered, and our love, still unnamed, was building itself on the solid foundation of truth and compassion. The next step would be inevitable, and I knew I needed to make a decision that would change her life and mine forever. My simple prayer in the bedroom, right beside that fragile woman, not only comforted her, but gave me the absolute certainty that God was calling me to a mission much greater than just cleaning her house. I knew Ms. Audrey's healing wouldn't come from more silence and solitude, but from a firm, loving intervention, something she had never experienced in her world of transactions and formalities. I needed to take the reins of the situation, and my fear of losing my job was entirely replaced by the urgency to save this life that had become so precious to me. The next morning, I walked into her bedroom without my usual uniform, dressed in the clothes I wore on my days off, carrying a simple tray with a nutritious breakfast. She gave me a polite look of surprise, and I knew this was the moment of role reversal, the point where my power to care would surpass her power of wealth. I was standing there not as the maid, but as the only person who truly cared about her survival. You are not going to drink coffee in bed, and you're not going to read any reports today. From now on, your priority is to eat, take your medications on time, and walk through the garden to get some sun, I said, with a calm, firm authority that surprised even me. She opened her mouth to protest, her wounded pride stamped across her face. But I stared her down with my silent strength, and she understood this wasn't a request. It was an order. I saw her tense body writhe in the bed, torn between the humiliation of being ordered around by her employee and the sheer relief of finally having someone take control of the chaos. You can't do this, Penelope. I am your employer, and you are overstepping every rule, she grumbled, but her voice was weak and lacked the usual conviction of the Ice Queen. She was testing my limits, and I couldn't waver. If I get fired for looking after your health, so be it. But I'm not going to stand by and watch you wither away because of your loneliness and pride. You need help taking back control, and I am here for that, I answered, and my absolute honesty disarmed her completely. She realized my attitude wasn't about insubordination, but about love and loyalty. She gave in. Slowly, but she gave in, accepting the plate of fruit and the glass of juice I handed her, and I saw the weight of all her suffering lighten through that simple act of submission to my care. Her pride was still there, visible in her marble eyes, but it was giving way to a trust that was terrifying for her and intoxicating for me. She finally allowed herself to be cared for. Over the following days, I took complete charge of her routine and her health, and the mansion, once a cold tomb, began to fill with life and purpose. I organized her pills, forced her to eat at set times, and accompanied her on short walks through the immense garden. I became her shadow, no longer out of invisibility, but out of a need to protect. I felt an immense, dangerous joy being in control of her recovery, and she, the powerful millionaire, depended on me, the maid, to survive. She started looking at me not as an employee, but with a silent admiration for my discipline and the strength of spirit that came from my life of hardships. She was seeing the true wealth that money cannot buy. One afternoon, sitting on the porch, she stared at me for a long time as I poured her water, her eyes welling with tears of gratitude, but also with attraction. I would give away my entire fortune to have your peace, Penelope. Your character and your loyalty are worth more than all my money, she confessed, her voice choked with emotion and the acceptance of her new dependency. In that moment, I knew she no longer saw me as a subordinate. She saw me as her safe harbor, her salvation. Our love was ripe and ready to take the next step, the step that would tear down the final barrier between us. The power dynamic had flipped, and our destiny was about to be sealed by the forbidden connection my soul had been yearning for so deeply. The tension between us was almost palpable, and the mansion, once cold and silent, was now charged with a dangerous electricity that made me feel Miss Audrey's breath even from a distance. I had become her guardian, her nurse, her anchor to sanity, and this forced proximity had destroyed the very last barrier between our affection and our repressed desire. The control I had assumed over her life was about to yield to the pull her presence exerted over mine. It was a Saturday night, and I was getting ready to leave, feeling the good, honest fatigue of someone who had fulfilled a day of care and dedication, but also a sadness over the distance we would have to maintain on Sunday. Ms. Audrey was in the living room, sitting in her armchair, and she called out to me with a low, hesitant voice, asking me to come closer for one last thank you before I caught my bus. I stepped toward the armchair, keeping a safe distance for my own good. And she looked at me, her eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and longing that I recognized immediately. The scent of her perfume, which I already knew by heart, was stronger that night, mixed with the warmth of her skin, and the air suddenly felt hot, despite the New York chill. She was no longer drunk, but she was intoxicated by an emotion that consumed us both in silence. "You saved me, Penelope. Not from the divorce, but from myself. I owe you my life," she whispered, and reached out to touch my cheek. A slow, unexpected gesture that made me hold the breath in my chest. Her touch was soft, yet firm, and her skin was warm, burning my cheek with a prolonged caress that was no longer from boss to maid, but from woman to woman. I closed my eyes instinctively upon feeling the gentle contact of her fingers tracing my face, and my soul cried out to God to give me strength, but my heart betrayed my logic, longing for more of that forbidden touch. She didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned toward me, her face just inches from mine, lips slightly parted and eyes locked on mine, asking permission for the inevitable. I didn't say anything, and neither did she, but our complicity and repressed attraction spoke louder than any social rule or fear. The kiss began hesitantly, a soft, exploratory brush of lips that had been seeking each other through months of tension and loneliness. It was a slow kiss, carrying all the suffering and redemption we had lived through together, and I felt my world collapse in the most beautiful way possible. The emotional connection deepened, and the kiss grew with an urgency that came from the soul, and I felt her lean even closer, pulling me into her universe. I held her face with both my hands, and my internal monologue was an anthem of guilt and absolute bliss, for I was kissing my boss, the woman I was supposed to serve, but who now meant absolutely everything to me. When the kiss finally ended, long and lingering, we pulled away slowly, our hearts beating in unison, with the exact same frantic rhythm of people who had just committed a wonderful madness. Her face was flushed, her eyes shining with an intensity I had never seen before, and the silence settled heavy in the room. The joy of the kiss was immediately replaced by a wave of guilt and panic, and the fear hit me with full force. I looked at the boss I had just kissed, and she looked at the maid who had dared to love her, and our perception of reality shattered into 1,000 pieces. The line between professional and forbidden no longer existed. We had crossed a border with no return. "My God, Penelope, what have we done? I can't do this to you. I'll ruin your life. I'll have to fire you," she murmured, her face in her hands, feeling the weight of that transgression and the dread of the gossip. I knew she was right. Our professional relationship was unsustainable, and our love was a risk that could cost both my future and hers. I looked at her with all the strength I had in my soul and took her hands again, but this time with the firmness of a partner, not an employee. "It doesn't matter, Ms. Audrey. This is stronger than both of us. The forbidden is already real, and now we have to decide what we're going to do with this truth that unites us." Our love was a secret we could no longer hide, and the mansion had become a minefield. The morning after that forbidden kiss was the strangest and most tense we had ever experienced in the mansion, with every footstep and every glance loaded with dangerous meaning. We avoided each other, and I was back in my uniform, desperately trying to resume my role as the maid. But the memory of her touch and the warmth of her lips were burned into my soul. I knew our professional relationship was over, and now we were just pretending, waiting for the inevitable explosion that would put our truth to the test. The bomb went off late that morning, while Ms. Audrey was on a crucial conference call about the future of the foundation. I heard her cell phone ring on the coffee table. The number belonged to a very close friend of hers, an envious socialite who always looked down her nose at me with disdain. She answered with her usual coolness, but within seconds her face went pale, and she let out a gasp of shock and panic that sent me running into the living room. She hung up the phone and stared at me with wide eyes full of terror and rage. The gossip, Penelope. Our secret. It spread. Martha called to ask me if it was true that I was causing a scandal with a staff member in the house, and that my addiction was back and worse than ever. Richard must have planted the story. He wants to destroy my reputation, she murmured, her body trembling with indignation. A wave of guilt crashed over me, and my internal monologue screamed in fear of having ruined the life of the woman I loved because of my boldness. I thought about my paycheck, my sister, and my dignity, and the urge to run away and disappear back into my simple neighborhood was overwhelming. Anything to protect her from the fallout of that forbidden love. I was the weaker one, the one with less to lose, but the one who would cause the most damage to her reputation. I walked over to her with a heavy heart and held her cold hands. Ms. Audrey, forgive me. I will leave today. I'll leave your house, and then the rumor will have no basis, and Mr. Richard won't be able to hurt you. I cannot allow my presence here to destroy your legacy and your life. I will go back to my world, and you will return to yours, I said, tears streaming down my face, feeling the agonizing pain of the impending separation. She yanked her hands away from mine with a sharp movement, and I stepped back, thinking she had accepted my proposal of sacrifice. But instead of agreeing, she looked at me with furious intensity, her eyes brimming with determination. Don't you dare do that, Penelope. If you leave now, you confirm to me that the gossip is real, and you send me right back to the loneliness that almost killed me. If you leave, you kill me all over again, but this time, out of cowardice. She stood up and began pacing the living room, agitated, her voice choked with emotion, talking out loud about her life built on lies. This life is a fraud, Penelope. This mansion is a prison, and Richard wants me to go back to my facade of a life, alone and miserable, so he can feel victorious. He wants me back in the ice castle, but without the key that is you, the only person who brought me warmth and truth. I watched her in awe and fear. The Ice Queen was facing her final deciding moment. Richard's world of social status, or my simple world, full of love and truth. The confrontation was no longer between us, but between her and the toxic society that had imprisoned her for years in golden misery. She had to choose between the facade and her soul. I am not going to let that man tell me who I should love and where I should find my happiness. I am not going back into the darkness, Penelope. Not after you showed me the light. I don't need his money. I need you to be real, she confessed. Her eyes locked on mine, and her face, despite its pallor, was filled with a strength I had never seen before. In that moment, I knew she had chosen me over all her comforts, and that our love was worth far more than her status or her fortune. The fear was still there, but it was replaced by an immense joy and the absolute certainty that God had used pain to bring us together. Our journey in the ice castle was ending, and a new, much simpler and truer life was about to begin. Ms. Audrey didn't hesitate. She chose truth and love over comfort and luxury, proving that her courage was her greatest wealth, something Mr. Richard could never, ever take from her. She looked at me with the determination of a warrior who had just won her hardest battle and, with a sigh of relief, made the decision that would change both our lives forever. She would never go back to her life of lies and loneliness. In less than a week, she packed only the absolute essentials: her abstract paintings, the books we shared, and her simplest clothes. She left the massive mansion to the lawyers and the high society gossip, and she didn't look back, fully accepting the risk of losing the foundation and a portion of her fortune. She wasn't running away. She was choosing freedom and happiness, and her only luggage was the certainty that love was her new and only destination. I helped her move into my small apartment in Queens, a modest 2-bedroom place with walls that needed fresh paint and street noise drifting in through the windows. It was a universe away from the Upper East Side mansion, but there, in that cramped space full of life. She seemed more at ease and happier than she had ever been in her palace of marble and silence. I watched my boss, now my partner, sitting on the old, soft sofa in my living room, laughing at a TV show she would never have watched before, eating my diner food, and drinking the simple coffee I brewed. She no longer had her driver, her housekeeper, or her social status, but she had my hand to hold and my life to share, and that made her shine with a light money could never give her. The illness was still there, quietly lingering, but it no longer terrified her, because I was there to remind her to take her medicine and to hold her hand through her panic attacks. She had finally found her peace amidst the clutter of my simple life, and I found my purpose in the complexity of her soul. Our love wasn't an escape, but a home. And we were two imperfect souls who completed each other perfectly in simplicity. Ms. Audrey gave up her fortune, but she got herself back. I let go of my fear, but I gained the strongest, bravest woman I had ever met. Our love was the redemption of us both, the ultimate proof that social differences mean nothing when your heart is in the right place, and that true love saves you from loneliness anywhere, whether in a mansion or an apartment. One night, while we were lying in bed, she hugged me tightly, resting her head on my chest, and thanked me for daring to break the rules of the social hierarchy. I stroked her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, and smiled in the dark, thinking of everything we had overcome together, our very own forbidden romance that became our beautiful reality. I looked up at the plain ceiling of my bedroom, praying in my heart to Father God, thanking him for the journey, the suffering, and the union. I understood that the Father didn't want Audrey to have a shocking religious conversion, but a pure emotional redemption, and that my purpose was to be the instrument of this love that saved her from the dark. My life was no longer a shadow in a gray and white uniform. I was the partner of a woman who learned to love simplicity and value character. I was proof that God uses the most unlikely people to save the most lost souls, and that love has no social class, no price tag, and absolutely no limits. Our story was just beginning, and I knew we would have many challenges ahead, but I wasn't afraid anymore, because I had true love by my side. I looked at the woman sleeping next to me, and I knew I wouldn't trade that simple apartment in Queens for the cold, empty mansion on the Upper East Side for anything in this world. Her life and mine intertwined at the point of greatest fragility, and our social difference became the very strength of our love. Destiny brought us together in an unexpected way, proving that true wealth lies in purpose and in the courage to love who you are meant to love, and that loneliness is only truly broken by vulnerability and faith.